the thing that's called the world always has the capacity to do work. It always has that option, and that's where it becomes from. That's where it begins. Using become to trying to to trying to restage or to image the initial conditions. And that's beginning, that's becoming, that's the first instance of it. That's the first iteration of the quality of time and the occupation of space. It always has the ability to do work. It's the intrinsic quality of the beginning of the world. And what it's able to do is influence chemicals, the building blocks of life. You can also see how mechanistic it is. And because it requires it. Why must such a thing be? Why, instead of a non-living world, a non-living universe, why must there be a living universe? What quality does this living universe have that gives it an preeminence amongst the other options? Well, then that's a question to ponder as your privacy. It always has the quality, it always has the ability, it always shares that characteristic to do work. Because in virtue of what is present, there must always be this corollary to it. And from our ability, from our similar capacity to extrapolate, to utilize the technology of the imagination, but utilizing the imaginative space, not in fantasy or in or unjustified, intellectually dishonest contemplation, but to utilize the imagination as a groundwork to establish the arrangement of facts and truths into storyline and story into explanatory frameworks. And the framing problem is one central issue. The framing problem is a key disturbance in the process to enlightenedly describe the world, to put thoughts to it, to establish it and describe it in contextualized form. That means it becomes transcognizant, meaning that others can see the idea with similar resolution. And then that's another goal of speaking on things. And I remember continuing down the line of the authentic, actual individual, and how, and this is because the project is to find a certain combination. Nature is on a search for a certain combination to then preserve it. And then these combinations are like keys, because they unlock something of the world that before wasn't. And then that's what unlock means. And then there is the key that goes into it. And if that key is conserved, it's replicated, of course, because that's one of the attributes that give one high probability of replication, simply because that it can take on the role of a key. But this is a distributive, and this an extensive trait, and it's transferable. The world, because the world becomes of what we choose of it, because it's a product of our choice, and our choice is also a product of factors that play a part in themselves. So it's dealing a hand against oneself in ultimate talk. But what it creates at the bare bottom is decision making by factors that one is only a bystander to this neurological that is a bystander to this neurological scene. And what can become of it is multiple things, but not to continue down those lines, but concentrate on how the actual individual recreates the world. So when a human comes upon what this is, this exact thing that's going on with however means it's acoustically being represented in your presence, it's only to establish this connection point. It's an acknowledgement that there is life, there is the continuation of it, and there is the pursuing of virtue or its closest as approximation for each person, but establishing something that is permanent around it. And this is that opportunity for, once again, such a cliche use of the word, but coalescence amongst denominations or sects, because what they're after, what that key, that signature, what is after, what the saints are after, what Mother Teresa is after, or what the world itself is after, is being able to establish in permanence this state that's no longer an occupy or accused, to create a state that is no longer similar to that of hell or corruption or dishonesty or dishonorability, all these other negative connotation and that can be assigned to the world. So it's trying to get rid of this stigma. And it's solvable because it's existable. It's one of the few things in the world that's existable, and such a pleasure to utter that statement as a communication of a nature of reality. The fact that these states are existable, it simply means that we are present in the world to continue. We are present in the world to make, to think as enlightening as possible, to measure and balance our thought and consider our thought as we'll consider items we're dealing with in three-dimensional space. And this gives gives a bunch of things that are just rushing without one. It gives a great trust, a great authority for man to sculpt himself this line he's already familiar with. And so then that's the move for union, for another way to think about how the earth, when it becomes open, is established. Because this is what happens, and this is the statement here, that you will not need what are considered documents to navigate across this three-dimensional space. When man reconsiders it, he will backtrack from trying to think of the world in terms of profit. He will immediately start to think about it in terms of experience. And when experience is prioritized, it changes the standard of living on a global scale. And these things are possible. This sentence, all cases, the world has produced enough yield and bounty for itself. But is this the distribution, because it's manded and minded and confined and restrained by the forces and of the powers that be, because of the way nature have chosen to unravel this story in this particular chain of epochs. But it feels particular because in each moment where there could be a replaying of the world from initial conditions, it's something else. It's not. It cannot be, because just the same credibility that gives this first, this particular chain of epochs its signature. It's what gives it its signature and nothing else. Then it cannot be compared to any other moment, because the decisions that are made in time are weighed so flimsily that if any other detail were to be altered, it immediately and connectively alters that chain of epochs. It gives it a different different arrangement. And these are what are the factors that play along and continuously. But in this case, when the recognition is achieved, when the target is figured out, it gets down to this same conclusion wherever one is located across the face of the world, because these are just different scenery changes. What is true is the fact that let's call him a heterotroph before we start to consider him as the descendant or relative of the angels. He's first this thing because this is present, that he's a heterotroph, and you can sort of think about him as an organism. You can develop what religions are grasping for from that platform. Sort of think of him as a autotroph and think of him as a multicellular organism, but capable of making decisions, and their decisions guiding them towards pleasure and away from pain. And now they are trying to have a guideline to live harmoniously in their ecosystem. There it is. And then in the ecosystem, furniture with skyscrapers and Ferraris if you wish to, but it could be from mud houses and toupees to the Burj Khalifa. It could be whatever it is, but this is what's going on at this level. This is what you are wishing for, because he's away from equilibrium. You see, the fight for life is to return back to equilibrium. He's in disorder, and he's in the effervescence that describing as that continuous effervescence that gave him the data of that gave him his live data over time, over centuries, and all that energy, that burst away from equilibrium, it's trying to seek some resolution in itself so that it can reposition more at a more restful state. And in this case, this is a build of communities where each person, is concerned with the life of another, because it gets to that same conclusion. All the arrows point towards Rome. That's always what's happening. Life is always trying to seek a way to better congregate itself, better arrange, organize itself. These are organizational problems, these polycrisis and in system intrinsic difficulties. There have been spoken of adequately in other moments on other times, but it always gets down to the same issue where because there are system problems, they have to be solved from the components by the subsystem, the components as a subsystem. It's this connection between components that have a specific function that gives a rise to the word spirit, that gives a rise to the collective consciousness and the mood of the collective consciousness, let's call it. But that's being transferred, just arithmetically between each person. It's the combination of individuals collectively that are deciding to contribute or not contribute, to withhold or to support or to affirm. And these decisions are, and when they're summed up, when they're aggregated, is what decides these things at that scale, on the scale that we just attacked them from. So it's that trying to refigure the image, but before that, the meme has to be propagated. The meme of just what the world is and how can one exist and understand it. It's a very pocketbook sides of enlightenment, salvation. Thus, is a redemptive. It's a redemptive collectible, meaning that carrying around this attitude can only improve what has been contemporarily coined vibe, or some equivalent of a state. There have to be a word that describes almost like a plasma, like a fluctuation, but that creates a sort of almost tangible fluid that is that sense to be called vibe, that it has some tangibility about it. It's felt and is embodies in the participants that are in that situation, and then that's one way to sort of sit down and monitor how things and how the world can move about and what's changeable about it. There's of course this change, and that's the point to emphasize, to really create, to be a wet blanket in this particular moment, that it becomes traumatized and thus it is ingrained in the mind of in the collective attention, that there is room for improvement, and it's your part to be about it. It's your role to be part of this movement towards it, because it's so great, the illusion that nature has contrived, that man really he holds this to be true, that he's separate from one another. He doesn't see himself this way. Knowing this too, but saying it forgivingly, seeing him from the other perspective where he comes from animal. It's the same man that meets up in the middle ground, but these guys have been moving from different areas. Some come from one side, other come from another side, and they're supposed to figure it out in the moment they call the present. And then this is just a conflict of incommensurable views, but this is from perspective, but perspective ring true, is derived from one's environment, does create, and environments are created for differences, depending on your factors and elements that create their local space. So all these things are just playing a part in man, and in this hodgepodge of I mean, it can be something as simple as just you not being in the room 5 seconds ago that creates a argument between men. And I mean, these things they were able to be solved at that very interconnected from this very interconnected point of view, or this attaching and updating and mutually updating point of view. And then all these things are to be solved, but they take time, and they take not really time. Not using that sounds a very cliche as it's being altered, but not taking time much more. But what it's taking is understanding. But understanding is seeing it as trying to quantify it by temporal measure. But it's by that understanding that, oh, this is something about world, and trying to talk about it in that way, and thus you're framing it in that way, and you comprehend it in that way, and so this way is for the better. This is a battles of ways that and what that world signifies, W-A-Y. What is a way? What is it? What is this way versus that way? Isn't that what they were speaking about when you pass the synagogue? Isn't this, or when you pass the what other one is just obscure? Are you past the temple? What way is that? There's just a way of something, and this is the thing that is always being dealt with. It's not a way. It's not that word. It's not exclusive. It comes more from the human department than it comes from the human being, a religious human department. Because being a human just involves you. Well, once again, being a human, but being an animal just involves you in ways. I mean, it passes everywhere in the animal kingdom. There are just ways and strategies and variations from here to there. But it is this combination of mind that creates a certain consensus on how the world can be understood. Thus, the majority takes the rule. If it's measured that far, because this is the only way to interpret the world. Not only will you interpret it interpersonally, but you also interpret it human to on a subject-object contrast. You also deal with it on a subject-object contrast. All these different these two combinations of ways, or both these two combinations of ways, right? Ways of relating to the world, both impact how one will finally see the world in their habitual analysis. I mean, there's just so much to go down on this road that it ought to, in trying to create a certain a decorated tangent tree, and that it's taking what we came from and speaking about what the world is, and what the beginning is trying to represent, as far as man being an animal, and as far as man being occupied by facts, being occupied by imagination, that's using it as a technology to create a certain categorization of facts into truths, and these are stories, and it becomes extensive, and it becomes plotted, and it becomes transitionally organized, meaning that the moving from one section to another is just as important as the sections themselves. I find that it's in this space, these gaps, that attention is distracted, and man moves on to other trains of thinking. Being able to regress back and forth and alternate from the beginning of where, and to the ending, to the beginning of where, to the ending of where, it's all on part of the same practice, and they both should be held equally in pursuit. Well, then other things should be said in other moments, and those things should be preserved, not to be copyrighted in this time.